Thank you so much, Ram. Your presentation embodies the twin virtues of rigor and brevity. Thank you. It's open for questions. Please.
For the sake of brevity, and we have to catch up a little bit, just one quick question, Ram. I mean, we have discussed it many times. What you, in a way, suggest with your pyramid is a sort of multi-dimensional optimal control exercise. Huh? Because, you know, you have the CO2 thing, which is long-lived. You have the short-lived climate pollutants. You have black carbon and so on. Some of these aerosols are positive in a way. They suppress global warming. Others are increasing it. And ultimately, or optimally, one would clean up the planet in a way that we keep global warming to a minimum while preserving the health of people.
Right.
And this is quite a subtle challenge, actually. Yeah? And I just wonder whether is my experience with politicians often that they always go for the easiest solution. Clearly they pick out and they pick up. So if you tell them geoengineering might work, they say, oh, we don't need to do anything. If you say methane can be sort of reduced, okay, we don't need to do anything about CO2 and so on. I just wonder how you want to avoid that the argument will be hijacked by those who don't want to do anything.
Thanks, John. I'll just make a quick answer, which is that is exactly what this meeting should bring about in the declaration. We need to focus on public health. If we do that, we have to bring down those cooling aerosols. And it's after that, it's people like you, me, Jeff, we have to work hard to make sure we bring the carbon lever down. So there's no option for us to leave those pollutants up there.
Thank you. Professor von Braun.
It's just a procedural suggestion, Marcelo, if you would be so kind to call on our visitor, Phil Swift. He has been forewarned, and then that Ram wanted to include that then in the discourse right away, if you don't mind.
Yes, thank you so much. So I turn the floor to Phil Swift, and I know that he will be swift in his interventions.
Underway here. Hello, there we go. Thank you very much. This is a fascinating experience for me to be here the last few days and to listen to world thought leaders on these topics. And I wish some of my colleagues here from the energy industry were able to hear this directly themselves. I'm very grateful to Ram, who invited me to attend this session, and I'll comment a little bit on how that unfolded because it'll be helpful in some of the observations I want to make. And I'm honored to be able to make a few comments here. I hadn't expected this opportunity, but I'm very grateful for it. So just quickly, a little background here, very briefly, in terms of some context setting for me and some of the observations I'll make. As the introduction suggested by Ram, I am in the Canadian energy industry. The Canadian energy industry is the 5th largest fossil fuel country in the world. I got involved about 30 years ago as an oil and gas securities analyst and with my partners involved in capital raising and advice on mergers and acquisitions in the investment business. And 29 years ago, or that was about 35 years ago, 29 years ago, we started a boutique firm that has now grown into Canada's largest private equity firm investing in the energy industry. So I'm not directly in the energy industry, but I'm very involved with people in the energy industry. I also, about 10 years ago, became involved in some initiatives at the University of British Columbia in founding a Center for Social Innovation and Impact Investing, and one of our themes was low carbon economy. And I've also, in my family office, hired a postdoc in climate science and in climate policy and finance. So I feel like I'm on both sides of this issue. with perhaps some interesting perspectives. And the process that led to being here was because I was very disappointed with the level of insight and dialogue that I was experiencing in the energy industry on climate change. And not everyone in the energy industry is in denial or a denier on this, and there's some very intelligent people and well-intentioned people, but there are some advocates that express strong views on denial on climate change. And in the last few years, I really wanted to dig in, and when I pressed them on their arguments, they seemed weak, if I speak candidly on it. And through Dr. Guarneri here, I had the opportunity to meet Ram and sought out a meeting with him to do, for what was me, a deep dive on climate science, and I think for him was a shallow swim. And he was very generous with his time, and I read about a dozen books, and I collected all the best conspiracy theories that explain climate science, and Ram encouraged me to sort of give it my best shot in terms of stress testing the views, and Ram, as you would appreciate, in his very succinct and insightful way, was able to elucidate me and educate me on the insights that we're hearing about today. And so, as a follow-up to that, and I felt that in terms of developing a sound strategy, truth is probably your best guide. And from truth, you can develop the best strategies, and that was really what I was hoping to achieve in that exercise with Ram. And what it led to was a discussion with Ram about creating perhaps a bit of a dialogue with the energy industry to see if there wasn't some more constructive sort of communication that we could have, because it seemed there were two solitudes in this issue. And so we invited a colleague of mine who is the chairman of the who was the chairman of the Canadian Petroleum Association, and a brilliant man, a very successful career, a wonderful family man, a community leader, but I would suggest that he was unsure on climate change, with maybe a bias to denying climate change. And we had a meeting in Scripps with Ram earlier this year where, as he would describe it, many in the energy industry feel vilified. And so he was very grateful for the opportunity to meet with one of the prominent thought leaders in this area. And he was very grateful for that opportunity and thought that would be a wonderful opportunity for others in the industry. A little bit too. Is that better? Okay. That it would be a wonderful opportunity for others in the industry to have that experience. And so Ram and I have talked about achieving that. So just a couple of observations and then some recommendations from my perspective. I think clearly I've come to conclude very clearly that the world needs to shift off fossil fuels, and that's one of the objectives here, communicating that need. But it will take time. There are many transitional strategies before a complete decarbonization. But the emphasis, as an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, I always worked hard, and I encouraged others to work hard, but I think the better word is perhaps urgency. I think that's so important to pursue initiatives successfully. They always take longer and they're more complicated, and so I think I would emphasize the urgency. And I think the successful energy companies of the future will probably be those that view energy not as fossil fuels, but energy as a portfolio. The world runs on energy, and we've all benefited from the growth and support of energy supply from fossil fuels, but that world needs to come, has a sunset on it. And so I think the successful companies of the future, energy companies, will be those that view it as a portfolio and make that pivot and shift. And I think many of the European energy companies perhaps have pursued that strategy. I think private equity, the world I come from, can also play a catalytic role in supporting companies that are making change in alternative energy and in other approaches to our energy supply. And on the recommendations, I would encourage a constructive dialogue with the energy industry. And as Jeffrey Sachs said, I think some companies will need to be confronted, but I think, as always in human nature, they're also good people, and that will understand we're all in this together. And I think people that feel, and again, I'm quoting one of my colleagues here who says that those people that feel vilified, as many do, aren't as open or as constructive as they are as if they're brought into the process. And and not to compromise the process, but I think to add to the process in its best form. And don't want to be too Pollyanna-ish about it, but I think it's worth exploring bringing the best, or perhaps some of the enlightened energy leaders on side with this dialogue to form a better joint narrative in terms of pursuing solutions. And I think there are those that have their head and their heart in the right place to do that. And then finally, just as one small point on the declaration, one addition that I think might be helpful, and that would be in the final point where it talks about collaboration. I think it would be valuable to add collaboration with business leaders on this, as I think enlightened CEOs are used to developing and executing strategies, and they're also used to marshaling resources to achieve objectives.
Thank you so much, Mr. Swift, for your intervention. Ram, would you like to comment?
Yeah, just very briefly. It'll be very nice, the questions from now on, whatever time we have, to be addressed to Phil instead of me. This is a chance we have to talk to the energy industry. The other thing I want to mention is I have not received any funding, nor do I hope to receive any funding from Phil Swift and his colleagues. One thing, remarkable thing happened. He brought 4 influential Canadian industry group to my lab, as he said, including the chairman of the Petroleum Association. I don't know if you know about this, Phil. After the meeting, we were walking out, and this chairman of the petroleum industry whispered in my ear, "Ram, how much time do we have?" And I told him, "Not much." And I didn't tell him how long, but I'll tell you, you can tell your colleague, we feel about 10 years, 10 to 15 years. We need to switch.
Thank you so much, Ram. Let's use the time metaphor seriously. And are there any questions for Ram's presentation? Or can we continue with the program? Jeff.
If we get rid of the diesel, black carbon, that is a cooling. And if we get rid of the sulfates, that's a warming. What's the relative size and time scale for each of those likely choices?
That's the crux of this whole unmasking issue. Believe it or not, no modeling group has done that study. So I'm just left to guessing from the pie charts of IPCC. Black carbon, we have a good idea, because California cut down its black carbon emission by 50%. We had data, and we found, that's why I'm claiming black carbon is definitely warming the planet. No other aerosol changed, just black carbon came down. We published this. And then we use other aerosol groups. Basically, all of us are persuaded black carbon from diesel. And the warming potential is 1 ton of black carbon has the same warming effect as 2,000 tons of CO2. But it would be a catastrophic mistake. You use that number to say, oh, I don't have to cut down CO2. No, that's not what we are saying. So, but can you believe we don't know how much sulfate is cooling, how much is nitrate? They're different source. Nitrate comes from NOx from car emissions. Sulfate comes from coal. And in the chemical soup, when they mix, they don't know how to untangle it. Lelyphil is going to make a brave new effort on this. Give him about 2 weeks. Can you give us an answer?
Thank you so much, Ram. Thank you so much, Mr. Swift. Amazingly, we are 5 minutes ahead of time. Thank you.